Hunchback with crooked legs and a big nose. That's what people said about me, and that's what I thought about myself. My complexes began a long time ago, from the moment when I first noticed my shortcomings, at the age of 5. I wore a mask on my face all the time when I was a kid, but my crooked nose could not hide any genes. These complexes were interfering with my life a lot. Every morning I washed my face without looking in the mirror. I did not go shopping because I got upset and felt even more flawed against the background of beautiful women. My mother used to bring me clothes home herself, but it was rare because I never asked her to. Despite my gray appearance, I too, like every other teenage girl, had a boyfriend I was crazy about, Colin. He was the most handsome guy in school, and of course he didn't notice me. He only hung out with the popular girls, handsome and rich. But one day, fate unexpectedly made us bump into each other. I was carrying an iced coffee in my hands, walking, strolling through the park. It was my day off, but on the narrow path, I met Colin and his posse. Shit, why now? I said to myself. His friends often mocked me, insulted and humiliated me because of my appearance, making fun of my floor-length skirt. But I couldn't wear anything else because of the curvature of my legs.
Hey, look who's coming! It's Miss Crooked Legs with a big nose,
yelled that jerk Teddy. I lowered my head even more, almost staring at my chest, carrying my coffee, and wanted to get past them as quickly as possible. Teddy hit me and I poured the coffee in his direction, but it hit Colin right in the face. He was angry. Sorry, I said, frightened, and pulled out a handkerchief and started to wipe his shirt with it. But Colin took my hand away very rudely and said,
Hey, who let you touch me? Back off, you bogeyman.
His words hurt. Teddy laughed even more, and I left them in tears. The day was ruined. I walked to my old car, barely opened the door, and got in, wiping away my tears. But then Colin knocked sharply on my door.
Open up, hurry up.
He was agitated, shaking, and looking around. Colin hid in the back seat and asked me to leave as quickly as possible. Just then, I noticed a crowd of guys outside. I could see they were looking for someone. I looked quietly and drove away. After about 20 minutes, I stopped. That's it, I said grudgingly. Colin got out from under the seat and said,
Thank you.
But he wasn't going to get out. Get out!
No, I can't.
What does this have to do with me? 20 minutes ago, you insulted me, and now you're asking for my help?
I can't, it's dangerous out there. I can't go home either. They're after me.
That's not my problem.
Okay, what do you want?
I turned to him and told him I didn't want to see him anymore. Colin was so insistent. He said he wasn't going anywhere. So I just went home. I lived far away. On the way, the jerk fell asleep. He's so handsome, even when he's asleep, I thought to myself, and then I punched him in the face. He woke up frightened, and then I tried to kick him out again. Colin asked, Is this your house? I nodded my head and he got out of the car. He thanked me again and I went inside, but he immediately knocked on the door.
I'm sorry, I don't have a place to stay tonight, and I don't have money for a hotel.
Are you out of your fucking mind? I told him, but a moment later he was already sitting on my couch.
Nice place you got here. Didn't expect it,
he said. Another word and you're sleeping outside, I said, and he covered his mouth with his hand. Colin sat around and I did chores around the house, made myself dinner, and sat down to eat alone. His stomach rumbled throughout the house and I sighed and looked at him. He immediately sat down next to me and started eating. I watched him eat and I liked everything he did, but I kept my cool. You'll sleep on the floor. They haven't brought me a bed yet. I just moved here, I told him. We struck up a conversation. The conversation was light and simple. I asked him why he was being chased down, and he told me that he was stupid. He'd lost at cards to some bad guys, and now he was being chased. Then he asked me why I wore a long skirt all the time. I said, None of your business. My grandmother called me in the morning and told me to bring Grandpa's scrapbook from the lodge in the woods. I got ready to go there, but Colin tugged at me again. Are you going everywhere with me now? I asked him gruffly, and he asked for at least another half day. When we arrived in the woods, Colin's face was enthusiastic. He said he'd never been out like this before and that he loved it here. I got the album, and when I came out of the house, Colin was already sitting in Grandpa's old boat. Can you boat?
No, can you?
Well, you're gonna help row. We got in the boat and paddled down the river by the house. The weather was nice and sunny. This is my late grandfather's boat. He used to take me on it when I was little. I suddenly told Colin, not expecting to. He smiled.
Lucky you. I hadn't seen my grandfather or my parents. They were always at work. Sometimes they forgot to wish me a happy birthday, and then my father just gave me expensive toys. When I grew up, I started getting cars," he said sadly. "You must have grown up happy."
I guess I did. I had a good childhood. Nobody talked about my crooked feet or big nose back then, I told him.
"People are very mean. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have insulted you then. I just acted that way in front of the guys. I don't think you're ugly, and your nose isn't big. It's normal, it's proportional to your face," Colin said.
I smiled. After minutes of awkwardness, I decided to dilute and started rocking the boat, Colin squealing like a girl and me laughing. Then it suddenly poured with rain. Colin shouted that he was afraid of messing up his hair and got off the boat. "Don't step on it!" I yelled, but it was too late. We both rolled over. Wet, we swam out of the river and ran into the house. Colin undressed and wrapped himself in a towel, and I stripped off my clothes and came out in an old shirt found somewhere in the house.
"Wow,"
he said. "What?" I asked.
"Your legs, they're not crooked at all," he said, blushing. I blushed too and said, "Thanks." When we were dry, we got in the car and drove back to town. I gave Grandma the album and Colin asked me to drive him home. But once we got there, those guys were waiting for him. My car stalled, as luck would have it. Colin grabbed my hand and we ran away from those guys. We ran so fast that I ran out of strength. Then I stepped on my skirt and fell. They caught up with us, but Colin blocked us in. He asked the guys to let me go and said he would stay. But the biggest one came close to us, grabbed Colin, looked at me and said,
"No one's gonna touch that scarecrow. Her face is already ruined," he said.
Colin became furious at that point. He pounced on them, but there were too many of them. They were beating him up, and he yelled,
"Run!"
at me. I called the police, then I ripped the hem of my skirt and jumped the guy. I blindfolded him and sat on his back. The guys heard the police coming and scattered, and I managed to tie that freak up. The guy fell on his back abruptly and ran, but the police grabbed him, and I couldn't get up. He hurt my shoulder badly. Colin called an ambulance and carried me in his arms to the doctor. He never left my side. When I woke up, he was beside me, and he was so excited. "What are you doing here?"
"Just making sure you don't get taken."
"Who would take me?"
"You don't know you're beautiful. Everybody likes you."
I smiled. I felt embarrassed. Colin took my hand and said,
"Thank you. You saved me."
Then he kissed me for the first time. It was pretty sweet. From that day on, he wrote and called me all the time and came over while I was in the hospital. 5 days later, I was discharged and went back to school. Colin picked me up in his car, came in with me, and everyone in the hallway looked at us strangely when I got out of his car, and then I went under the arm of the most handsome guy in school. I was wearing a short skirt, by the way, and a little makeup. My nose didn't seem that big anymore. Colin took my hand, and then Teddy came over.
"Are you out of your mind? What's going on? Why didn't you answer your messages?"
he asked Colin, and he squeezed my hand tighter and said,
"I was with my girlfriend. We've been busy."
Teddy was taken aback.
"With that bogey woman?"
And immediately got punched in the face.
"Don't talk to her like that, okay?"
said Colin. All my complexes have been gone ever since.
Hello everyone, my name is Tom. At first you will think that my story is more like going to the movies, but unfortunately, this is a harsh reality, and I would like to share it with you. Since I can't tell anyone else about it, especially those who once knew me, I started life with a clean slate and there were good reasons for that. Now I will tell you more. From the very beginning, my life was hectic. The fact is that I grew up in terrible conditions. My father left my mother when he first found out that she was pregnant. My mother, Phoebe, was very worried about it, so she said, "We have no relatives. There was no one to help us. All we had was a small apartment that Phoebe inherited from her dead parents. Don't be surprised that I call her by her first name. It's just easier for me." My mother did not have a high sense of motherhood. I remember once, when I was 4 years old, she left for a few days somewhere, without even saying where. I was locked in the house alone, leaving no food or water. I had to eat what I found, toothpaste, something from the trash. I drank my own urine, and when on the third day I was already completely exhausted on the kitchen floor, she arrived. I think if my mother and I hadn't happened to have a neighbor drop by that day, she wouldn't have done anything and left me on the floor. But our neighbor, Mrs. Friendly, is an old grandmother, and she took me to the hospital. My mother was only worried about being sent to prison, but somehow it all worked out. About a couple of weeks I lived with a neighbor, so I have not eaten so well yet. She fed me so well, washed me, put me to bed. Although Mrs. Friendly was old, she was adept at handling children. She lived alone. Maybe that's why she paid all her attention only to me. My mother was jealous. Imagine, even though she didn't take care of me, she was jealous of my grandmother, and when I got better, she took me home again. I remember the scandal. The neighbor did not want to give me away, scolded my mother for her behavior, but she did not want to hear criticism. She said that I was her son and she knew how to treat me, so she took me. My mother had taken another job, and now she was almost always gone. At this time, I ran to Mrs. Friend's to eat and sleep. We had a great time. I loved her probably more than my mother. Agree, whatever the mother was, the child still loves her, just a little less. Despite all the conditions, I grew up, and when it was time to go to school, my mother, of course, did not give me away. And then the whole nightmare started. Some men started coming to our house. They were unfamiliar to me. My mother usually made me sit in the hallway at this time. I could sit there for hours. And only then I began to run away to the neighbor. Phoebe didn't know we were still in touch, because I knew she was against it. I could spend half a day or half a night at Mrs. Friendly's without Phoebe noticing that I wasn't there. And then I would run to my seat when a man came out, and I would pretend to sit there all the time. The neighbor was shocked by what was happening, but could not do anything. And when I turned 14, I was determined to run away from home. I didn't know where to go, and I shared all my secrets with Mrs. Friendly. She begged me to stay with her, but I couldn't, because Phoebe would have found me. One day a neighbor talked to my mother, offered to take me away for upbringing, like she would take care of me, but my mother went berserk. I didn't understand why she needed me, because she was still indifferent to my existence. To which Mrs. Friendly replied that deep down in her heart, she probably hated herself for being such a mother, but she had buried herself too deep, and it was very difficult to get out. And I was only a small memory of a better life for her, for which there is no hope anymore. Then I definitely decided that it was time for me to leave. And then Mrs. Friendly came up with a clever idea. What if I changed my face? This would give me the opportunity to live with her, have a roof over my head, and most importantly, I would get what I wanted, care, and moreover, I would no longer have to hide from my mother. But how to do it? The operation was unthinkable because it was expensive and I needed my mother's permission. Besides, it's going to take a hell of a long time. Then we found a faster and more painless way: makeup. It was lucky that Mrs. Friendly had worked as a theater cleaner before, and she had good friends with makeup artists from there. In just an hour, they made a different person out of me. I changed my style of dress, put lenses in my eyes, tried to walk a different gait. I had my hair dyed a different color, but most importantly, with the help of cosmetics, I had a different face. I didn't recognize myself when I looked in the mirror, and I was very happy. Mrs. Friendly spread the news that her granddaughter was visiting her indefinitely while her daughter was abroad. Everyone believed her, because they knew that she really had a grown-up daughter. And I stupidly packed up and left, leaving a note for my mother not to look for me. I wrote that I left in search of a better life, without her. I was not sorry, especially since I had the opportunity to observe her life out of the corner of my eye. At first, she excited the neighbors, asked her for help to raise money to arrange a search, but the initiative lasted about 2 hours, after which another man came to her and she closed the apartment door. And I was relieved to be at Mrs. Friendly's, to have a new home, a family, and a quiet life. I helped Mrs. Friendly do the housework, cooked the food, she taught me that, cleaned up. And then they gave me documents in a different name and I finally went to school. I was very late in my years, but it didn't bother me. Better late than never. Mrs. Friendly got a good pension, benefits for the bills, and when I was on vacation, I worked part-time in a cafe, then at a car wash. This money was enough for us to live. It took about 1.5 months and I came home from school. On the way up in the elevator, my mother came to see me. Wearily, she named the floor and then greeted me. "I know you. You're Mrs. Friendly's grandson, right?" she asked. I just nodded my head, and she went on as if she were talking to herself. "And I lost my son, or rather, he ran away from me. I'm not a very good mother, I know, but I can't help it. He's about your age and even looks a bit like you. He's a nice boy, but I don't deserve him, so I'm not looking for him. Wherever he is, he's better off there than with me," she said, as if exhaling, and I noticed the tears in her eyes. Her words made me uneasy, and I had no idea how to react. And then we arrived, and I got out of the elevator, and my mom said, "If you see him, tell him I'm sorry," she concluded, as if she knew it was me. I paused for a moment, then continued down the hall. I told Mrs. Friendly about it, and she smiled and asked if I wanted to visit my mother, but I said no. If I hadn't gone missing, she wouldn't have said those words. Even though I felt sorry for her too, I couldn't find the strength to forgive her, nor did she ask for it. We'd been neighbors for a couple of years now, and I'd continued to grow, study, and take care of Mrs. Friendly. I made friends and my life changed, and then I learned the sad news. There was an ambulance at the entrance. I thought it was for us and was very scared, and then I found out that she had come to my mother. I ran into the apartment for the first time in so many years. It was terrible. Dirty, dusty, there was a terrible smell, and my mother was lying on the floor. She was barely breathing. I pushed the doctors aside and ran to her. I wanted to cry. I was afraid. My hands were shaking and I wanted to cry. I asked, "What's wrong with you?" And my mother said, "Forgive me if you can," and closed her eyes. My mother left me a letter that said, "I know it's you, and I was happy to see you living next to me and doing well. I'm sorry. I love you. I'll leave the apartment to you and Mrs. Friendly. Mom." I read the letter right after her funeral. She died of an overdose. Most of all, I was uneasy at the thought that she knew it was me and did not even try to return it. She just let me go. Maybe she's not such a bad mother after all, do you think? I've forgiven her, and they don't hold grudges against the dead. But I'm sorry too.